Okay, welcome everybody. It's a topic that I think we have covered in slightly different ways in the past. But today I want to focus especially on the tech side of things. Because as you know, our big sort of subject facing the world right now is technology, of course. And the country that gets the lead on the technological front is going to sort of call the shots in the future. Now, technology has always called the shots in many ways because any country that has mastered some sort of technology, even going back, hundreds of years, the Enlightenment came about because of technological type of scientific inquiry that set people off on writes so many things on that, and then steam came along and electricity, computers, and so on. So they made the big difference to society. And of course, it's such an important part of our lives now that we can't do without technology. And of course, it's not just going to be a benign type of area that everybody sort of enjoys, albeit I think it has those characteristics of delivering a lot on the social side, which is beneficial. But the one that really is to be concerned about is the abuse of that. And it can be abused. It's like a knife. You can either chop onions with it or stick it in somebody's stomach. So technology is something that we need to be concerned about. So today's subject is going to be this. If you can see that, I'm going to start looking at it from the perspective of a very global view, because the two big powers are, of course, China and USA. And China has actually been quiet, as you know, in the past few decades. And it's only in the last couple of decades that people have started to take note of China. And when it started to take note of China, they saw that there is going to be a tremendous amount of progress that they have to sort of try and understand and see whether there's going to be, the competitiveness of China that is going to make a difference to the societies of the West, or for the world, in fact. And we know that it is making a difference, especially since Xi Jinping came in about 8 years ago. He started to become a bit more assertive in defining China's role globally. And to that extent, he started already building this infrastructure. We've talked about it many times, the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. And that was his way of, in fact, making a statement to the world that China has come of age and is starting to be able to deliver on many fronts. And the front that really the world needs, of course, is infrastructure. Because without infrastructure, you can't get much headway on your economies. It is for this reason, now without going into too many details of what BRI is about, we all know that, Biden, when he came in, he proposed a budget of $2 trillion. And that is essentially to try and see whether one could sort of do something about the economy of the USA, which was in decline on very many fronts, not just on technological fronts, but infrastructure was decaying to a large extent. And he wanted to sort of rebuild that. And that's why he came up with the slogan called B3W, Build Back Better. That was his slogan. And then, of course, he brought that idea to the G7 recently in the last 2 weeks that G7 took place, and proposed that there is going to be a real need for the democracies, the so-called democracies of the G7, to take a position with regard to China's advances, especially on the global scene. So what they proposed at the G7, which stuck in my mind, of course, is an alternative to the BRI. BRI, the alternate was going to be costing the Western sort of pockets to the tune of $40 trillion. Now, I don't know where he got that figure from. Nobody understands really what he's going to do with that and how did he come about with that. So I'm still struggling to find out. So it could be just a sort of statement made at the G7 to try and say, well, we are going to sort of try and copy China a bit, but do it in a big way. Now, that's on the technological side in terms of having to fund the project. The other one is, of course, political, and we talked about it at the last lecture, where there was a trade war that is underway, especially when Trump came in, he put in tariffs, and we talked about that. On one end, you've got the free market. Then by adding tariffs to the free market, you're trying to curtail the flow of goods and services. And if you are going to curtail that, then of course, there's going to be an imbalance developing, and the country that imposes the tariffs then, looks at it, for its own benefit, not necessarily the global benefit. And these tariffs have been put in, although they're at a pause right now. And Biden is going to be able to look at it and see whether he's going to unravel that or take those tariffs away. We are still waiting for him to come to a position on that. The other aspect of this trade war is sanctions, and we talked about it last time. The extreme sort of position of a trade war is sanctions, which means that you see what's happening in Iran and so on. And we talked about that all last week. So today we are going to be talking about not just the trade war, but the competitive edge that each of the two titans are going to be sort of be engaged in. Now, the innovative type of advantage is still with the USA. And we know that I mentioned this, Eric Schmidt, when he came up with the report when asked by the government to see how that innovation can be maintained in the USA and not let it go past to China. So he came back and said, well, it's very difficult because you're going to have to sort of put in a lot more money in R&D and so on. And then when you look at, and we'll go into some of the figures that I'll be showing you as to what China is doing on that front, as to how much it is actually putting in by way of R&D effort and on which sectors of the economy. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, let's get going on that. Well, again, I think before we get into the detail, here I've got this agenda for today. It sort of summarizes, in a way, the sort of holistic picture as far as the technological front is concerned. And that technological front concerns, of course, not only the budgets and the cost thereby of that tech war, but the individual sectors that are going to be affected is the smart education, which I call it. And by that, what I mean is, of course, the students coming and going from one country to another. And of course, USA has having a huge amount of Chinese students, up to over 300,000 coming into USA every year for the past few years. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And of course, the e-commerce. Now, that's another technological sort of area which needs to be, again, looked at from the point of view of the advantage it accrues to the society. E-commerce in China is moving ahead, as we talked again about last time or in the previous talks, how the big sort of super apps, as you call them, the WeChat, the Alibaba and so on, they have in fact also sort of contributed enormous to the commerce or economy of the country. And we know that some of those apps have been banned in the USA. So we'll see which ones are those. Now, as far as airports are concerned, China has brought in a lot of face recognition technology so that with the pandemic coming in, that became a a big driver for it as well, so that people didn't have to handle the check-ins and so on. So you went in through the airport to your sort of seat without much human interaction. So, but here we've got the problem of privacy. So here there is going to be an issue out in the West. Now, the other sector, of course, is the electric vehicles. Now, and I've talked about many times Elon Musk, Tesla, and so on, but what they, to Trump's credit, was that he managed to force the Chinese to let Tesla come into China without having a local partner. Now, that wasn't the usual practice in China. So now Tesla is producing a lot of cars in Shanghai. And of course, they're the global leaders in electric vehicles. And we'll talk a little bit about that just briefly. And then, of course, we know the thing about the network. Huawei was a big issue with Trump, and he even, in fact, put into custody the daughter of the owner of Huawei from China. And of course, it's a 5G technology, and it's advanced. So a lot of countries are beginning to scratch their head and say, look, why do we want to sort of, delay the advances that are already developed? But then, of course, the reason that USA gives is that a lot of personal data is being stolen by China if you go and use Huawei, which is probably a questionable type of accusation. Now, the other aspect of technology is, of course, what are the ways that you can encourage this development, innovation to come about. You need to provide the infrastructure, so IT parks are there, and of course, for funding, as we see in Silicon Valley. So that's quite developed in USA. But now China has got a city called Shenzhen, which is really becoming a futuristic city in terms of some of the technologies and some of this, what they call unicorn projects or companies coming up. A unicorn company is one which has over $1 billion in terms of, capital worth. Then, of course, then you've got the Chinese space station. We know that recently they put a lander in Mars. And of course, they've put up space station as well. And that we'll talk about it very briefly as to how that came about. And then microchips, we also know that because, the chip is the fundamental sort of, if you like, component of any of the gadgets and technologies that are coming in. And although USA doesn't make many chips themselves, they do design them and farm them out to Taiwan, big country, big company that produce about half the world's supply of microchips. So China is also affected by it because the restrictions are going to be put in on a lot of countries on the chip utilization. And of course, in Huawei's case, of course, this Android was not going to be used because that belongs to Google, and therefore Huawei is going to. So you can see some of the measures that are being taken. Now, these are on the technological side. On the political side, which I'm not going to be talking too much about, but it's worth mentioning, that on the political side, the G7, and prior to that, the formation of what they call the Quad. The Quad is a group of countries which are USA, Japan, India, and Australia. Again, countries which are going to try and keep close to the West in terms of the policies to try and hold back China, which I think may not necessarily succeed because all these countries, except for even India, they are big economic have good relations with China. Especially in the case of Australia, as you know, practically a third of Australian economy is dependent on China, and they supply their iron ore and what have you, natural resource to China. And if China sort of puts in, tariffs on that, they're going to be affected, and that's where we are on that. So you could say that the trade war is interlinked with the technological war as well. And then, of course, we'll see what the cost is. Okay, on to basically some little slides that we can see. Okay, Biden has made most. Now, Biden is still not taking the definitive position on China. Although initially, or before the elections, I think he was a bit soft on China, a little. But since Trump was quite hard, and because he's got a very tiny majority in the Senate, he is now becoming a bit harder on China, to the extent he said that China is not going to become number one during his watch. So you can see he is determined to sort of keep USA ahead. And we'll have to sort of see whether he's going to be successful. Well, the Republican Party is also anti-Chinese, so he might have some sort of comfort to know that some of his measures might go through. So here we are. So technological war between the US and China continues to heat up under Biden. So there's no let up. And China is not too happy about that. And of course, I don't think US companies are also happy about that. Now, this is the previous Secretary of State, Pompeo. He says China has come to this point of advanced technological innovation through theft of intellectual property. Now, I think what China is saying is that, look, there was a time that we did sort of take the technology from the West, but now it's the West who's trying to take the technology from us because they're more advanced, like Huawei, for instance. They're 2 years ahead, and even on the EVs, they're ahead, and they're becoming quite sort of much at par with a lot of other innovative areas. So it may not be necessarily that China's the accusation. You see, the intellectual property is an old game that gets played. It's not just between US and China. It has been there rampant since the time of the Greeks. They took the ideas from Persia, and Persia took, the Arabs took the ideas from the Greeks, and then Europe took the ideas from Arabs, and so on and so forth. So the intellectual property game gets played, except that it's become a little bit more commercial nowadays, because we can now keep track on who's got what. Now, I put this up simply to say that, the strategic concerns are also coming into play, because technology is very much built into these F-35. Now, I've mentioned last time, the F-35 is quite a unique type of plane, although I don't know how useful it's going to be in the current sort of environment. But the amount of money was over $1.5 trillion was spent in developing that. And half of that money has gone towards software development. And software, as you know, can always be hacked. So it remains to be seen whether that investment was worthwhile for USA. Now, this is the trade war. This is how it started. I told you about that last time. It started with in July 2018. The blue is the US tariffs, and the red is the Chinese tariffs. So there's a tit for tat type of game that's being played here. So it started off, and then it decreased. And then, of course, USA put a lot on the $200 billion worth of goods where we put tariffs on. And of course, China started to cool off a little bit. And then this is still sort of a continuation of a pretty aggressive trade war, but I think it has started to pause now. Now, let's look at and see what is the actual advantage that you have in a technological war. It has to do with the R&D expenditure. And if you look at this graph, you can see it's quite astonishing that this red thing is China. In the year 2000, it was very low compared even to Japan and to EU and to, of course, USA. But as time went on, in just about 2 decades, it is nearly catching up with USA. USA is at 549. That's a figure of 2017. So by now they have caught up anyway, I think. And I will show you figures what their plans are for the future. So you can see it's made tremendous amount of advantage because they have started to do a lot of original R&D. And that's why they're saying, our copyrights are with us now and patents are with us, and we're not really interested in stealing old technology from USA. So here we are. This is the IT spending again, in terms of, but it's a repetition of that. So, okay, this gives you an idea of the total, world economy. It's about 88 trillion. And this is Asia here, blue, United States here in red. And here we've got Europe in green, and the other countries. And in this blue, you can see China is the biggest player, and here is the United States. And this percentage-wise, you can see 16% of the global economy is Chinese, and compared to 24 of USA. But then, of course, in the next few years, China is going to be saying, we are now going to be coming at par and even surpass US economy. So this is the size of the industry, 5.2 trillion. And these blue bubbles over here tells you where the focus is as far as technology is concerned. Here again, we are looking at a rather sort of broad sort of picture as to what's happening in the world in terms of these innovations and expenditures on IT and who are the winners sooner or later going to be. Now, this is again putting the context that China's real GDP has been growing over the years. It's about 8 to 9% every year. And you can see that's quite a tremendous amount of growth. So China is doing something that seems to sort of worry G7 as well, because G7 is saying, we are going to do a B3W, which is a Build Back Better type of infrastructure as well. Because they are realizing that at this rate, China is going to be surging ahead a lot faster than one anticipates. Here is a little thing that's historically useful. Now, this is the economic power shift over the years. This is going back 1,000 years. Yeah, this is 1000 AD here. It was here somewhere in the Middle East and in China. And then it came around to Europe, and then to USA, and then it's from the Europe again back to China. So you can see the shift is taking place, global shift of economic size of the economies. Now, this is again a picture where you can see the rise of China's GDP. Now, why is GDP important? Because GDP is the one that enables you to fund the expenditures that you feel are necessary for the country's development and well-being. And you can see initially not too much, and then from the year 2000, it's really started to, and that coincides with China becoming a member of WTO. Now, what WTO did for China was that it opened up the whole market because it started to abide by standards which everybody accepted. So you could import your goods quite reasonably. And that gave a spurt to China because it became the manufacturer for the world. And we see that it is still today. And that's what Trump was worried about, because he says, okay, China in the free market has done well, but we are going to put up some walls and tariffs because, the free market has not worked for us too well. Which is rather an odd thing for the USA to say, because they have been the champions of free market. So you can see that the jobs have gone because, Trump supporters, as we saw, are the people who are most affected, because those jobs went off to China and, of course, to automation. I keep repeating that. So there is a big constituency in USA and even here in UK that says we want our jobs back. And in order to get the jobs back, you can't just say, okay, fine, we're going to sort of build something and pay the same amount of money, because the economy is global, with globalization and so on. So you can't start to produce cheaper goods all of a sudden. So you have to be smart. And in order to be smart, you've got to be able to innovate. And to be able to innovate, you need to put some effort in R&D. Now, this is where the buck stops. And we are seeing that although promises are being made of getting jobs back and pumping up the economy and all that. It's not going to be an easy thing to do. So here is a comparison of GDP per head purchasing power. Okay, so anyway, all these comparisons I'll skip because we've got a lot to cover. Now, I put this picture up. Essentially, if this is a coastal in the sea, you can't find a single place even to stand here. And on a moving picture, there is a wave coming through it that lifts all these people up and down. So it's all people standing in the sea there who are having a holiday. So you can see the extent of the population that is becoming middle class in a way and can afford holidays. So this is the consumer spending again. It has caught up with Japan here. So actually, these figures are put up so that for future we can look at, but it's again repeating the same thing. Now, this I thought it would be interesting to see just how this power is shifting. Now, at the moment, you can look at the whole world as having three hubs. One is the US one in blue, the rest, the one in China, and this one in Europe. This one headed by Germany, and this one by China, and this by USA. And these are the sub-hubs of economic activity. And you can see the size of that tells you how big those relative economies are compared to the other ones in the neighborhood. This is a further division of the hubs, it's a similar one, so that's not one. Now, the recent meeting, this is the G7. Now, if I took this picture, thought I'd show this picture because it seems to be a lot of confusion here. Each is looking at somebody else to see what is the answer to China. Because really the G7 was to deal with China. And we don't know, maybe as time goes by, we'll get to know a bit more about it. But it seems to me the whole effort of G7 is pretty scattered. And people are looking, over their shoulders to see what's being done by others. Okay, it's going to cost quite a bit, this tech war. So here we have the world will pay dearly for that. And the cost is going to be, this is $3.5 trillion over the next 5 years. And that's an underestimate by Deutsche Bank. This is a figure that you have to keep in mind because, we're talking about very, very big numbers. This I thought I'd just put up because that gives us a bit idea about how much money is being spent on the military side. Because even though technology consumes lots of money in R&D and so on, a lot of that money comes from the budget of the military as well. So you can see it's about 526 billion being used for, I think that's an old figure. It's more like 700 billion now. And this is about 250 or 60 billion in terms. And the other countries are very small. UK here is 38 billion as far as concerned. Of course, Saudi Arabia, 45, for no rhyme or reason. They're buying so much to stay in power. Now, what is the counter sort of brands that are putting up the innovation in the West that is challenging, if you like, China? Apple is one, of course, because the technology and the patents and all that are with Apple, but they build them in China. So China gets a certain percentage of this, and therefore, and also they have a market where they can sell. Microsoft, Google, Facebook, IBM, and SAP. Now, SAP, just mentioned that in passing, is one of the biggest German companies that deals with what are called enterprise resource planning systems, which is a software to control the corporate world and their manufacturing and their whole enterprise. So it is a very powerful type of software. China doesn't have that at the moment, but they have something called Tencent, which also has very powerful sort of softwares, and we'll see some of those as we go along. Now, the tech war also means there's going to be separate platforms, because if there is going to be, if you like, high tariffs or sanctions on companies, then China is starting to evolve its own sort of platforms. Like an example is, of course, when China gets excluded from something, it starts to do it on its own. And that has made it much more self-sufficient and self-reliant. So it's possible for them to go for a completely new platforms. Now, these can be, if you like, now we have this WWW type of technologies. Now they're going to be developing a similar one here. Then you've got this 6G, they've got 5G, Huawei is already there. Then you've got this architecture of the CPUs, and then the operating systems, the global positioning systems, and the Internet of Things. We talked about it, how every gadget is now become with a little bit of intelligence so that transmits data. And then of course you've got this digital currency. Now China has already gone way ahead of that. They've got the digital sort of RMB already operational, and the Fed is thinking of bringing that in. I don't know how long it's going to take. So there is going to be a parallel type of platforms that are being developed, which is going to be in the end costly for the world. So rival sort of internet platforms, rival sort of internet telecoms, CPU structures, operating systems, communication networks, Internet of Things, payment systems, with very little interoperability. Because now with that sort of separation that is taking place, then if you want to be a global player, then you have to have both. So that means an additional cost and probably a waste in many ways. So what are Chinese goals? Chinese overarching national goals have become an innovative nation. This is what they're saying. We want to become an innovative nation by 2020. So they're already there. They have met their targets. They want to be in the front ranks by 2035 and the global scientific power by 2050. And they are planning to go ahead by having these type of plans, 15-year plans. And there's these plans are pretty targeted, which means that one can see where the money is going to be put and how it is going to be funded for the next few years. And therefore, there is some stability. Now, there's a 30-year plan up to 2. So it becomes really a very organized way of approaching your targets that you want to achieve. So all in all, is a $1.4 trillion during the next 5 years. So again, huge amounts of money. So China's, now intellectual property, we talked about China having to sort of rely on the Western technology and stealing them and so on. But China says, look, we are already starting 1.54 million patents, nowadays, compared to US's, 600,000 patents. So we are doing 3 times as much filing of patents and innovation than USA. So the tech war is beginning to have the advantage on their side. And what are they spending the money on? Since they want to achieve it by 2035 and 2050, they're going for what they call this innovation in artificial intelligence. We've mentioned that many times before: machine learning, big data, semiconductors, quantum computing, life sciences. I'm just mentioning this in order to say that there are subsections of this tech war that is going to be, in fact, addressed. And you need to spend on all these things to be able to get that acceleration in advance that I talked to you about many sort of talks earlier, that this acceleration that gives each of these sectors, an advantage, which in turn gives the other sector also advantage. So it's going to be affecting, healthcare, manufacturing, electric vehicles, and space, the whole lot. So there is no sector that is left. That's just a picture of the same thing. Now, I've talked about the 4th industrial revolutions, as you know, a few times. the basis of the fourth industrial revolution, of which we are in at the moment, is of course AI. That is the backbone of the fourth industrial. And along with AI comes this big data, because we're going to tie up with big networks, which means that there's going to be a very integrated type of management and control of development and of society, and what you want to deliver by way of bettering the lives of people. So these are the tools that are at the disposal of governments if they use it intelligently. So sectors impacted, of course, these again, the cars have been impacted, the intelligent networks, manufacturing, marketing, so energy solutions. So it's repeating the same thing a bit. Now, just a little bit more detail about the smart cars. For those who are not familiar with them, these are the electric vehicles, as you call them, EVs. They're coming in very fast, thanks to Tesla. They can go from 0 to 100 kilometers in 2 seconds. And they have super fast charging batteries that can charge 80% of it in 8 minutes. So you can say already, you can say the nails in the coffin are there for the oil industry and for the old technologies. Okay, now where is all this work going to be done? It's going to be done in technological parks. Now, why are they important? They are important because you have to be able to have like-minded type of people coming together with like-minded type of innovative industries, so that if you are going to prototype some type of component that you have in mind, then if it burns out or if you want to make additions, you just walk across the aisle in that IT park, and somebody or the other will have the thing you're looking for, and you put it together and you go ahead. So you can see it becomes incredibly good. Like for instance, in the Silicon Valley of USA, if you can't find somebody funding your ideas, you can go across the street and find somebody else. So it's the same idea with the technological type of solutions that one is looking for, and that is provided by IT parks. Excuse me. Now, nationwide, there are IT parks, 160 innovative parks there. And these become the drivers for the country's economic development. And these also these companies get tax exemption. And of course, to be able to be based on these IT parks, you need to show that you are having 50% or more of technological content to be in that park and get the tax advantages. So you have to meet certain criteria. Okay, now smart e-commerce, and we said that how is the USA going to cope with it? They're just banning WeChat and Alipay and this TikTok you might have heard. So by banning, you don't necessarily keep the technological innovation in your country. Like Huawei is 2 years ahead, and if you're going to develop your own, you're going to be 2 years behind. So by not letting these types of apps also coming in, one is sort of going to fall back on, this is here, these smart galleries and malls, these are, and TikTok was banned. So banning is not the answer. You need to come up. As I said in the last thing there, the lady in Iowa who sort of met with Xi Jinping said that USA must itself reach the position of advancement. Excuse me. I'm going to stop here because already I've used up 45 minutes. We'll go for Q&A and we'll pick up another time. Okay, please unmute yourself. And if you've got a question to answer, then we can go ahead and deal with that. Yes, anybody?
Shafi, could you please explain what big data means?
June, yes, that's a question I remember you asking some time back as well. Big data is the data that comes about when you connect a lot of intelligent or semi-intelligent machines together. And if they communicate with each other, they're transferring huge amounts of data. That's one example between machines. Then big data is also to do with what your hospital also keeps of you, personal data, which a lot of these US companies are trying to get their hands on, because they feel that that data is such a gold mine for them to be able to do some research on. And that data is big data as well. And then, of course, all our shopping habits that we sort of online, purchases that we make and so on. Now, that is also collected by companies. So that's also big data. So in a way, it's data that we are generating as human beings or through machines, which then gets consolidated, and then some AI algorithms can look at this data because it is so much and so humongous. Then they derive some information from it, and then decision making takes place. So that's the value of big data.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Maureen.
Yeah, a couple of things. I don't know if you saw a program. There was a series called Reggie Goes to China. He's a guy, I think he's a DJ in London. I didn't know him, but anyway, he was apparently quite famous and very interesting. He went to Shenzhen, where there are all these guys coming up with ideas. It's one of these probably, I don't know, you're saying one of these techno parks. Anyway, he went to one guy who had come up with about 10 different things that had been patented. And he said that he came up with a technique which was something to do with touchscreen, and it was copied by Microsoft. And he took them to court, but he lost, of course, because Microsoft against this one guy. And he said, well, Reggie asked him, well, why do you think you failed? Because obviously it was, correct. And he said, well, I had one lawyer and they had about 40. You're not going to get anywhere. So this thing about intellectual property, I think it's been going on both ways without, all this sort of injured innocence that the Americans say, oh, they've stolen our intellectual property. It's just a piece of theatre. So I think
of course, very much.
We're nicking their stuff all the time. But Shenzhen is such an interesting place. It's full of all this digital payments. Nobody's got cards or cash. It's all completely extraordinary. It's worth a watch.
Yeah.
And the other, briefly, I think Australia is being set up by America to create some discord with China over the antibodies, over the virus. They were talking about how
that's right.
they're challenging the Wuhan lab. But I watched a thing online recently by a virologist, an American guy, and he said when they started looking back at blood samples that had been taken in America and started looking back for the antibodies to see when it arrived in America, it was there in the middle of December 2019, which was pretty much the same time that the Chinese found it. And he said, we just didn't find it. So we should be thanking the Chinese. They found that there was this new virus. He said, we probably had all kinds of people dying of pneumonias in America during that period of time. And it might have started there.
Yeah.
But we've got to blame them,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, Pam.
I heard that there was this mysterious vaping disease in America, and lots of people were getting pneumonia, and it was blamed on vaping.
Oh, yeah.
And then suddenly it disappeared.
That's right.
And whether it came from there, whether that was...
Oh, yeah, no, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, no, we think it probably was not, it may not have started in China at all. So yeah, no, I remember, yeah, that vaping, that was interesting, wasn't it?
Mm.
Lots of young people getting pneumonia.
And apparently some military, American military, went to China, so they could well have taken it there. I mean,
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Ah, well, that's never going to come out, is it?
no, of course not.
Forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the US also was involved in that viral laboratory. They were actually funding their big
Oh, were they?
Really?
investigations on this particular virus. Yes,
Oh my God.
and they quickly pulled out. There's no
Yeah.
kidding. Yeah.
Ooh.
They've
And the
actually
reason
funded
given
that
for
particular
having to
viral
do it
lab.
in Wuhan, the reason that I found that they said they had to sort of do it in Wuhan is because the rules didn't allow in
Yes.
USA to do that type of research.
Mm.
And therefore they funded the Wuhan lab to sort of do that research on their
All
behalf.
right. Yes.
Oh, really?
Mm.
Yeah.
Ah, it's all a
Yes,
bit.
George.
Well, can I recommend you this newspaper, which has been launched? Everybody's seen it. It's called
Face marks.
It's
Yeah,
called
we can't
The Light.
see.
The light.
It's called The Light.
The
And,
face masks.
It's
Yeah.
published by doctors who are at last prepared to come out, and it's from Brunel, Imperial College, medical doctors, scientists, everything, blowing the whole lid off this whole thing. And I recommend you read this.
And face masks and social distancing.
Yeah, read this newspaper. It's
my
a proper newspaper. It's you know, it's about, it's huge, it's big, and it's
Oh my goodness.
goes into all the
Yeah,
stuff.
well, you need a week to read all that.
It comes out every week, but it gives you all the information about all this stuff that you need to know. And the
Yeah.
doctors are basically, they're saying enough is enough. You've been scammed for 2 years. Like you've got to stop this now.
Yeah.
Anyway, there. If you want it, I should say no more on the subject.
But George, just to reply to that, we haven't had a flu outbreak because masks and distancing.
Yes.
It just hasn't happened. And the
No,
same
it's
thing
not
followed
good.
in Australia. They did not
Mm.
have a flu epidemic, which kills
No.
thousands of people.
No,
So
No.
it does work. Something worked.
no, the figures have all been messed up.
What, flu? No.
Apparently flu disappeared last year. It goes on holiday, but it'll be back. It'll be back later on. It's a bit like the virus goes away for a couple of weeks. While they have Ascot or something, and then it comes back again.
No, every winter we have a flu.
I think you'll find that as the truth begins to unflex itself, that you've been massively conned, that you've been enormously scammed here. And please do not have the third jab, please, because
But George, one of the things that comes to mind is that who's the winner in this?
Huh?
Who is the winner?
It's an experiment. It's an experiment. It was the same type of experiment that was dropping Agent Orange in Vietnam. You had to experiment it on to see if it worked.
No, are you saying that it is a deliberate attempt by the governments of the world to somehow profit from it?
Absolutely. The atom bomb was an experiment. Didn't have to drop it, but they wanted to see if it worked or not. So it killed umpteen millions of people, and it was like all these things. But I don't want to keep on about it because I know people don't agree with me. Like I don't want to, and I don't want to.
Okay, well, we'll go back to our tech war and see. Yeah, Malila.
Yeah, can I make a comment? It's like this. I've tried to keep an open mind about China, and one positive thing about China is because of their government, that type of government, they are able to, and they do have made long-term plans for themselves and externally as well. Whereas in the West, because of our types of government, we don't make we are incapable of making really good long-term plans. I mean, US already, they're involved with their midterm elections. And here, as you know, I think what the government will do is always focused on what about the next election. So there isn't, I mean, we have our own problems, extremes of wealth and poverty, etc. But there won't be, you won't hear of long-term plans being set out. Biden did make a first step at long-term plans. So mostly what happens is little responses to China. Instead of the long-term plan, there is this short-term attacks and responses to
I
what
think you're
China is
absolutely
doing.
right.
And I think also they're missing the influence that China is building in the East, partly because through its roads, but they're getting a real good stranglehold, I would say, on some countries out there.
Well, remember we talked about this regional cooperative, or RCEP, the Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership.
All right, yeah.
It has about a third of the world's economies there, and they are very, very big, and they are going to be having not only just the local people, but like ASEAN with China, but they're going to have Japan and Australia and Korea and all those people as well. But India was there, but I think they're still sitting on the fence because they're afraid of China. But that bloc, I think, has become very, very sort of powerful in promoting. It's actually the old TPP. You remember Obama set up this TPP, which Trump came and got rid of, and China sort of, took the lunch, as it were, free of cost, and added to it and profiting from it. So you're right when you talk about some of the decisions that have been taken by Western economies, they haven't helped because they are short term. And the short term comes from the period of 4 to 5 years of government, which I think is therefore really safeguarding any abuse of power. But at the same time, the economic model of the corporate world, they don't have long-term plans either, because they have to produce some quarterly results, which show up at the bottom line. So they are very short-term also. So the whole economic models that we are following seem to be not delivering so much compared to what China, although we don't like the authoritarian type of governments, but the way that China is managing seems to sort of say, well, they are successful by and large, and therefore we can learn something maybe from that. Yeah, Maureen.
Just briefly, I think big companies in Japan have long-term plans. My brother worked alongside a guy in construction who came over as a visiting engineer from Japan, and his company had 50-year plans, 5, 10, whatever. So I think individual companies in Japan do it. Maybe other Eastern countries do. It's not a Western thing, is it?
No.
But the government wasn't, I don't think.
Yeah, because you see, if you look at Biden right now, he's got essentially 2 years to do something. And in the next 2 years, he's going to be campaigning again in campaign mode, Yeah. So really the term of 4 years gets reduced to 2 years, effectively. And even that 2 years effectively comes down to 100 days, because that's what is being measured usually. What's he going to do in the first 100 days? Yeah.
And then if the other side gets in, they spend the first 6 months undoing everything.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's always been like that,
A better way of doing stuff, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, George.
Yeah, but it's really interesting what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, it's always great stuff, I was thinking, why do we just accept these governments?
Sorry, we couldn't hear you.
Why do we accept all of these governments and politicians? Because I think that the world is going to change very soon. I think we're going to have big changes And I think people are going to go back to maybe cooperative communities, you know, where people living in, living in areas will help each other, you know, a bit like the old green money system. Remember the green money system?
I think there's an echo there, George. We can't get all of what you're saying.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yeah, better
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, like as I was thinking, why do we accept this system of world government that we have, whether it's Chinese or American or Russian, like as I think that in the future, I think that, it will either go one way or the other. It will either go totalitarian, completely totalitarian, or people will form up more communities, like the old green money system, and start helping each other. I don't think that the world can go on financially and like the way it's going on. Something's got to give somewhere.
There was a statement that was made when I listened to the 100-year celebration of the China Communist Party. It was just a couple of days ago, and it was a huge affair. And in there, they talked about one thing, which is said, this is a government not by the people, but a government for the people.
Mm.
You see? Basically saying that if it is going to be by the people, then you get all sorts of people coming into power and not being able to deliver. But the way that they have put it is, if it's a government for the people, which means the people's interests come first by whoever is going to be the government.
Mm.
So that I thought was a very interesting way to put it. And my fear is that as far as this global world and global sort of world, thing is concerned, we are far from it. But I think where we are headed is on the technological front, a position that certain countries will take, which is going to be very, very powerful. And it doesn't have to be the size of the country. It has to be that the country has got to be smart. So even a small country can really call the shots in the future, depending on how successful it is implementing its goals and delivering for the people. So size, I don't think is going to matter too much in the future. What will matter is, of course, the effectiveness of your government and what the people themselves will be able to achieve. If one can, in fact, give, if you like, people the freedom in an organized way, then I think a lot can be accomplished. We'll have to see when China becomes the superpower, as they are saying it will economically, very soon, that what they will be sort of doing for the rest of the world it remains to be seen. Because at the moment, they are still calling for a win-win situation, not a zero sum, because they say that we will win if you win as well. Not saying we want to win and we want you to lose. Because if you have that sort of mentality, then I think one doesn't get very far.
Okay. Can I ask you something else then? Like in the late 60s, we all thought we were going to go on to the, it was the rise of the machines. They were going to help us, and we were all going to go on to 3-day working weeks with full pay and, like lots of leisure and, like you wouldn't have to work over the age of 50 and all of that, to share the work around, Do you think that ideal is completely gone now? I mean, that is the only solution to make the whole world happy, is if people did work for each other, and you got rid of private property and, you nationalized everything and you just made sure that everybody had each according to their needs.
Yeah, we won't be able to do it on the old model of having to produce wealth, working hard, digging the ground or growing things, but we have to be able to move to a different paradigm altogether, where it is going to be a different world. Because don't forget that, as Hariri says, we are still evolving as a species, and we will be, helped by technology immensely when we get all these chips embedded into our brains and have the old thing about aging, solved, and people are going to be able to, sit back and create, something fantastic with the extra sort of capabilities that they have. So it's going to be a different type of species that we are heading towards, in which case a different type of life will also come about, not in the model that we are currently following.
Right. So would you say that the spiritual aspects of life will go? Because like if you can live for 200 years or something like that, and you don't get old, or you just stay young, how would that affect things like reproduction and the relationships between a man and woman? Will that become very sort of mechanicalized as well? Will there be a death? Will there be an afterlife to think about? Will all of these things vanish then?
No, I believe that, the rate that technology is advancing, and as again, reverting back to Hariri's book of Homo Deus, the book that he wrote, where humans themselves will become so evolved, and that if they will say be, and it is, which means that the old phrase from the scripture, which says God says be, and it happens, human beings will acquire that type of power in the future as well, and to be able to sort of say, well, be, and it happens. So I'm not so sure that we have to keep thinking in the old way, and the old models will still continue to work. It is going to be a new world, and then and the new inhabitants of that world will happen, and it won't be just like us right now.
But Shafiq, there's only going to be a few people that may end up with this extra chip, and they're going to be the dominant group. Yes. And the rest of us will be, in camps.
We'll be slaves.
Yeah, well, I feel
You're never
that
going to get the whole 8 billion population of the world embedded in it. And if everybody goes, be that, be that, be that, it's going to be huge amounts of disagreement on what ought to be.
Yeah, that's why we have to open up, Earth and go to other planets.
Oh no, we're never going to go to another planet. We've got to clean up the one we've got first.
Yes.
I think all this space exploration is all very exciting, but I think it's a complete distraction. And of course, China's doing it now. Everybody's got to do it because it's like, makes you look like a cool country, but what a waste of energy. All that ingenuity, you could be using it to get clean water and cure cancers. And, why do they spend it on that stuff?
Well, because there's a lot of world out there.
We'll never go to another planet because we are so incredibly highly evolved to live on this one, and everywhere else is going to be completely hostile.
This book also talks about how if we put the code of the DNA into electronic information type of code, that all you have to do is to beam that across to Mars or beyond, and that gets recreated and recreate whatever it is that you want to. I mean, I'm looking at these fantastic science fiction ideas and starting to believe that some of them may come true.
Well, I think you'll find that, mammals have evolved on this planet for millions of years. and we depend on one another. We're pack animals, basically. We haven't really changed in the last few 100,000 years, maybe a few million years. We've been Homo erectus for a couple of million years, and then it was you know, Homo Neanderthal and all these others. You know, we basically live together. We have to cooperate, and we can't change that. You know,
he says it's not the same, because you see, it was natural environment that brought about evolution, and that took millions of years. Then came the culture, and culture gave it an impetus to bring about humongous amount of change in human society. And now with technology coming in a big way, that is going to even accelerate the evolution, you know, tremendously. And that's why he says we can sort of become a new species in a much shorter time than what took nature, you know, millions of years to change.
But, you know, the worrying thing is, with all this progress, there are people here who don't have enough to eat. There's plenty of food in the world, and people are starving. So we will have all these things in our brains. We'll live till 200, but not if you're starving. Not if they don't find a way of sharing wealth and sharing food.
Well, don't forget that technology has made, you know, famine a thing of the past, except for political sort of famines and action. Yeah. So we have enough food, we just don't know how to distribute it.
Can't distribute it,
Yeah, we have, I think, a good prospect of solving all these problems. I think the solutions are there, but the political will is not there, you know?
I think you'll find, Shafiq, that this God that you mentioned, you know, who said to be, you know, also has a name for me and you, and that's Goy.
A what?
Goy.
What's a Goy?
Look it up.
What? A Goy?
Yeah.
What is that?
A non-Jew.
Goy is a Yiddish word for someone who isn't Jewish. I can't understand.
How do you spell that?
Well, it's not an English word, so you can write it how you want. It's G-O-Y. But George, I don't understand where this comes in. What's it got to do with anything?
Well, because like my course on Gnosticism goes into this in great detail about who created this world and everything else. You see, so like you know, like I'm not an orthodox religious person at all. You know, like I like to investigate. I like to investigate things, and I'm particularly investigating these three main religions, which all come from one religion, of course. You know, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And I'm particularly interested in their version of God, and etc., etc., and people who don't follow their version of God. You know, it doesn't matter if you're Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. I'm not picking one against the other. You know, but like you know, like it's, you know, in all religions, if you're not a follower of them, you're like an outsider. You know, you're like a peripheral. You know, but anyway, that's another thing.
Okay, I think we are running out of time, I think.
Yeah, Maureen, I totally agree with what you're saying as well. I can't understand why they spend these billions and billions on living on, you know, not on the earth, when you know, we could be using this money for so many better things. We can't live without gravity. We can't live on Mars. So I don't know what sort of life we could live there.
Well, very, very restricted, I think. But what I think would be great, if they could invest all these trillions of space research dollars into how to make communities more empathic with one another, how to teach kindness and compassion. Sounds really stupid, but you know, all the bullying in schools, all the crime, all the horrors of war, if we just focused, you know, when they put all those guys into the buildings in Los Alamos and said, don't come out until you've got this bomb sorted out. They did it. You know, if we put a whole load of whoever we want to choose to get in some research and say, look, figure it out. How are we going to manage the world to make it more peaceful, less competitive, less tribal? You know, all these religions tribally competing with one another. You know, There's got to be a way around that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You see, you put your finger on it. It's not the technology, it's the politics.
Yeah.
You see, the politics is the one which fails at not delivering and lifting poverty, because we've got all the means to be able to do that.
Yeah, I know. But we should concentrate on changing the politics, developing the politics, not just.
Well, that's a good question. How do we change that? How do we
You're
get?
saying about stick a chip in your head, you know, I mean, it sounds a bit weirder than what I'm saying.
Also, in families, people don't communicate like they used to with, I mean, I'm all for technology,
Yeah.
but my grandkids, they've always got their heads in Twitter or something.
Yeah.
And they don't actually talk to their parents.
No,
So
no.
we communicate less.
We are,
though-
we're getting worse. And children can't read faces
No.
or body language. They don't, because
No.
it's all tickety click. They
Yeah.
can't read faces. That's been shown. They can't read expressions, which is going for millions of years and over a generation.
Yeah, and we've lost that ability, that empathy, and you know, ability to communicate with each other.
Yeah, so I think you'll find when they write the history books in a couple of 100 years' time, that the greatest tragedy of the last 30 years was what happened to Jeremy Corbyn. If we'd had a Jeremy Corbyn government, the whole world would have been different. It would have been so. It would have been caring. It would have been compassion. It would have been so different to the people. And I really think that the campaign that was launched against Jeremy Corbyn was part of the things that they, you know, that these people who want to really control you, they cannot stand any honest politicians at all. And I'm afraid that what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, I think, will go down as a British tragedy.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot to be said there.
Well, he had some
But I
good
think we're
ideas.
running out of time now. I think we have to say goodbye now, I think. It's 1.5 hours already.
God. Too much talking.
Okay, well, we'll continue this conversation another time.
Thanks
Thank
anyway.
you.
Okay,
Thank
take
you.
care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.